When they come and if they have problems, the best response is, mm, oh, we don't have enough money to make it to the end of the month. Mm. Is my helping developing, and see if I got this right, but am I developing autonomy? Am I developing more dependency on me? Or am I, actually, as you say, am I teaching them how to fish or am I giving them a fish, right? That's kind of the idea of the
Yeah.
autonomy versus dependency, right?
As long as you consciously choose who you help, how you help, and when you help, then that's your helping boundary. Whatever it is to you, whatever it is to that person, it might change from person to person across different situations, but that is your helping boundary.
Super helper is less about what we do, but why we do it and how hard it is to stop it. I'm increasingly convinced the world will not draw a line. We have to draw a line. Hi, this is Andy. In the years of leading workshops on project management, I've yet to run into someone who said at a young age, Mommy, someday I want to be a project manager. You know, Often we end up in that sort of role, some sort of project leadership role, because we're good at certain skills, maybe, but we also showed promise that we could organize others and organize tasks and things like that. Well, in my experience, many people end up leading teams and projects because you care about your work and your people and your impact, and you want to make a difference, right? Well, I'll bet many of you are likely to be known as a helper and maybe even a super helper. So, what's that? That's the term business psychologist and leadership coach Jess Baker uses in her book, The Super Helper Syndrome. And it describes people who help not just out of kindness, but maybe even out of identity. People who are so wired to support others that they do it compulsively, maybe without realizing it's costing them something like their energy, time, boundaries, maybe even self worth. In today's episode, we'll talk with Jess about what drives this kind of helping and what it takes to shift from compulsive care to compassionate leadership. We'll talk about how to notice what kind of help someone really needs, why empathy and compassion are not the same thing, and how even good intentions can backfire with a team member when we jump in without even thinking. If you've ever struggled with boundaries, burnout, or just putting your own needs on the list, you're going to take a lot from this discussion. I can't wait to share it with you. Hey, quick note. If you or someone you know is thinking about getting PMP certified, we put together a super helpful guide called The 5 Best Resources to Help You Pass the PMP on Your First Try. We've helped thousands of people earn their certification. We'd love to help you too. It's totally free and it's a great way to get a head start. Just go to 5bestresources.peopleandprojectspodcast.com to grab your copy. Again, that's 5bestresources.peopleandprojectspodcast.com. Let's make this the year you get your PMP. Let's jump into our discussion with Jess about her book, The Super Helper Syndrome. Hey, Jess, thanks for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Andy.
I've really been looking forward to this, Jess. It was a lovely book to read. And, we'll get into ideas from that book in just a bit. But I'd like to start with you because so many guests, Jess, have told us my research started as kind of me search. Okay. So I'm curious what led you to focus so deeply on empathy and compassion and just the psychology of helping overall. And where does that fit into your own story?
Oh, so a number of strands. My upbringing, for sure. And I had on one side parents who weren't very empathic. And yet I also had a childminder from the age of 4. So
Mm.
someone who looked after me after school and in the summer holidays and things. In fact, I dedicated the book to her. I called her Auntie Jean, but she wasn't really a blood relative at all. I had Auntie Jean, who was a massive, I would say, the original super helper. So I had, what zero empathy looks like, and
Right.
I had what a lot of empathy looks like. And I followed the what empathy looks like, loved it, loved how it felt to be helped and to be in a setting where there's lots of love, lots of compassion. And I think by age 12, I wanted to be a psychologist. I mean, that tells you
That's
everything.
amazing. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, you are very transparent about your personal story in the book, and I love that because because sometimes it feels like somebody writes a time management book because they're just good at time management, you know, and or they were just set up to succeed because of how they were either wired or their early life. And you're just very open about how you sat. I was at age 13, and you're like, I just need someone I can talk with, right? Wasn't it? Or I can,
Yeah, that's right. I found myself in talk therapy and I asked for it, which was one of the very first times I actually asked for help. And lo and behold, it was given. And I'm so glad it was. So, having gone through talk therapy myself, I decided that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to help other children with emotional and behavioral difficulties, i.e., their families, because it's not just the child, obviously.
right, yeah,
And so I set my sights on that. And even though I took a gap year, 2 years, and even though, I did lots of other things in between, I always came back to psychology. I went through clinical training. Working in the NHS wasn't for me. Although I ended up working in dementia care, it was very special and precious. It was also very emotionally draining. So I learned about my own oversensitivity and not having emotional boundaries quite quickly. And then I retrained into business psychology. I thought that would help me as a psychologist, still help people who wanted to be helped and help them improve their own well-being. But at the same time, for me, still be in a place where I'm continually learning. And in the corporate world or as a management consultant, and now as a self-employed psychologist, I am constantly learning from my clients all of the time.
yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, you know, I feel like sometimes when you're in front of a large audience, or if you're writing a book, it's easy to have answers in a generic sort of way. But when you're one on one with somebody who's struggling with that issue, it keeps you like you have to keep learning, right? I mean, you have to see what actually works instead of just as in theory. And so you're on the front lines every day as you work with people as a coach. Right? So yeah, one of the things I love about your book, Jess, is I benefit when there's vocabulary, because when you name things, then you can notice them. Where maybe I wouldn't have even noticed it before if I wouldn't have that vocabulary. So you make a powerful distinction between cognitive empathy and emotional empathy and compassion, which I feel like I've heard in the past the difference between empathy and sympathy, but I feel like this was better. It actually was more actionable. So could you walk us through what each one of those means and why the difference could matter for those of us leading teams and caring for others?
Mm. Yeah, sure. Thanks. I'll try and be brief because you don't have to spend hours discussing all of this, but obviously I could. So on the one hand, if you break empathy down into two components, you've got two types of empathy. You have cognitive empathy, which is a knowing and understanding, and you have emotional empathy, which is a feeling. So with cognitive empathy, I know how you feel. With emotional empathy, I feel how you feel.
Mhm.
Okay, so learning about this, then writing when I was writing the book, The Super Hubble, with my co-author, who also happens to be my partner. So
Sure,
we
yeah.
spent 18 months literally sitting next to each other at the computer, having to be nice to each other, of course,
Yeah.
writing the book. And then so because I thought initially, empathy would be the answer, to why do people want to help? And most people would say that if you ask a nurse or anyone in the helping professions, why do you help? Well, because I'm empathic or, but actually, you can be empathic for not just because someone is suffering. So if you're having a really good time, you're at a birthday party and you're celebrating, and I've come along as one of your friends, I'm having a really good time for you. So
Mhm.
empathy could be fun. If
Right.
you're watching Jason Bourne as an example I use in the book because I love those movies,
Yes.
and you're experiencing the thrill with them,
Mhm.
jumping from roof to roof. I'm
Right.
experiencing that, and I don't feel fear. I feel excited. I feel
Mhm.
exhilarated,
Mhm.
and that's empathy too. So when it came to the question, okay, well, what is compassion? We explicitly say, and we use Martha Nussbaum's definition of this too, is that compassion is when you decide you have to do something to alleviate someone's suffering.
Mhm.
So it could be simple as empathy says, I feel your pain. Compassion says, and I want to do something about it.
I always wonder how do you as a physician, or let's say in your role as a helping in a therapy sort of situation, like how do you not get overwhelmed by, like, I'm thinking of the oncologist who tells people many times a day, you have cancer, that sort of thing. And do schools teach them how to do it? Or is it one of those things that each of us have to kind of figure out where we draw that line? I mean, what's your take on that?
Ah, interesting. So the I spoke to a lot of clinicians. I interviewed 50 people for the book, and many of whom were clinicians in healthcare settings, many of whom weren't, though. So I want to say that, there are accountants, lawyers, estate agents, all experiencing super helper syndrome and that form of emotional exhaustion. We'll come to that, and I can define that shortly for you, for the listeners. But when it comes to drawing boundaries, and you asked about training, surprisingly, there's still very little training about how to
Yeah.
care for yourself. It's actually in the US, the nurses have a duty of care to themselves. In the UK, it's the same thing. But you ask any one of those people who are trained, and even recently, and they'll say, we get barely any training on how to recognize our own needs. It's all about the patient. And they'll say, but that's how it should be. And I'll say, well, but you can't keep on giving from a place of depletion. You have to be able um to replenish your
Yeah.
own levels of energy and your own levels, and also protect your own levels of energy before you can give away too much. So it's really interesting how I think there's still a dearth of really solid, sound education around how to protect yourself. And by the way, if you are choosing a role in the frontline healthcare professions or any kind of frontline role, please always ask yourself why. And if you think because others matter, I want to say because you matter too,
Mm-hmm.
because you cannot help from a place of depletion. So it really isn't logical. But I think when people choose, like I did, the psychology as a profession, it's because I want to help others. It doesn't mean I'm good at asking for help for myself.
I don't think someone can read this book without is some introspection. Like, why did I choose this? Or, so I think you do it in a very gentle, curious way, but it's like we are often blind to those sorts of things. That's one of the many reasons I've benefited, but I think other people would benefit from reading the book is maybe to help give us some insights into that. And you
Yeah.
talk, the framework in the book about the four forms of help, because I think sometimes I just think of, well, helping or giving, like I don't think of it as nuanced as you did. So, there's the resources, information, expertise, and support. So could you just give us maybe a flyover of what each of those mean in practice? And I'm curious, have you found that we tend to rely maybe too much on one of them or two of them, or underuse, or overlook some of those?
Okay, juicy question. So the four forms of help, and it's brilliant to speak to someone who's actually read the book, Andy. So thank you so much. I really
Pleasure.
appreciate that. So, and I obviously love that you love it so much too. But so let's look at the four forms. We have resources.
Mhm.
Now, this is, stuff. It can be, the fact is, when I thought and when I interviewed so many people, everyone almost came up with examples of where they felt like they had to lend things or give things away. I've come across people who say, oh, well, I bought that thing for her because I saw it in the shop and I knew she liked it. But I didn't really have as much money as I thought. So, but I bought it anyway because I really wanted to gift it to her. So there's a sense that if we have something, we want to give it away to others so that other people can have it, or we want to lend it to them. But resources help can also mean offering them out energy. So, it could be doing simple things like carrying someone shopping, or helping them, walk across the car park or something to their car if they need it. So with resources, there's some negative implications. And of course, we unpack this in the book in detail. But the negative implications here are that you don't get the thing back. It's all very well
Mm.
lending something, whether it's money or a screwdriver, but did you contract with that person when you wanted it back, and indeed what condition you wanted it back in? And I share in the book that when I was 15, I borrowed a lot of psychology books from my friend's mother. And I took them on buses, I carried them, I read them in the park, I just devoured all of them this whole summer. And when I handed them back, she opened, she got them out of the bag, and she looked so sad. She was folding down the corners that I had kind of beaten up in the bag. And I felt so, and I still do, I feel so guilty even today because I wish I had thought about the condition the books were in when she'd given them to me, and obviously the way she wanted them back. Whereas to me, they're loved. I love a dog-eared book, but
Absolutely.
it wasn't mine to damage. And she, bless her, took a moment to kind of gather herself and didn't, in fact, shout at me or say, "How very dare you." She
Yeah.
was really
Yeah.
nice about it, bless her. But
Yeah.
so that's kind of resources help. And of course, that needs boundaries and contracting. Like, I'd like this thing back at some point in this kind of condition. But there's also information help. And I think, to answer your second part of the question, this is the type of help we give so freely. So it's advice, you tell something, somebody, what you tell them what they should do, you tell them how to do it, you tell them where to go for that thing, you give them information. People are trying to be helpful, but actually, is the information, you have to be discerning, don't you? You have to think critically, is the information correct? Is this information actually that useful? If you're the person giving information help, the person is probably doing that thing or using that information at another time in another setting. So you don't even know as the helper if they're using it like, oh, I told that person about this link they should look up for their health, but I wonder if they actually looked at it at all or did any digging around. And so, you're not sure as the helper whether it was helpful at all. And to be honest, when you're helping someone, you like to know, don't you? Like, oh, was that thing
Yeah.
helpful? Did you manage
Mhm.
to get that book or did you manage to read those things? And then we can move into expert help. And this isn't about the person giving the help, but the form of help. So it's an expert help can be something as simple as, let's say you've got a pest caller, a spam caller on your mobile phone, but you don't know how to block it. But you ask one of your children, oh, how do I block? They are the expert helper in that role. Oh, daddy, you just do this, this, and this. And they whip through your phone and magically
Right.
block this person from calling you. So it's not about the person as such. It could be, as simple as teaching your child how to do their shoelaces. It's when somebody knows more than you. The negative aspect of this is that it can cause dependency. So
Mhm.
if you're forever doing your child's shoelaces, they get to 32, they still can't do them up. That's not great, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Mhm.
um, in the positive way, it is about being that it is about being the expert and knowing, okay, well, there's something I know that I can offer somebody else. I'm forever kind of offering, free coaching to friends if I am asked and if they want it. Obviously, I now know to check rather than just
Right.
giving them advice. But there might be certain times in their lives where they come to me for specific types of support, and because I'm the expert, I might be able to talk them through something and that's useful in psychology that they can then use themselves. Yeah, so there's another form of support, of help, of course, and that is supportive help. And this is an interesting one because when Rod and I were looking at all the different types, we were thinking, well, supportive is really important and it is really common, but it's
Mhm.
often overlooked and underrated, I think, because it can be silent. A friend phones you in distress and all you're doing is listening,
Mhm.
you know, and that might not look like that it takes up very much psychic energy from you or emotional energy, but it can be really draining. If you're listening for half an hour or so, or this person's story is really distressing, it still takes its toll on you. So supportive help, yeah, this can be non-verbal. You can be listening. You can not be saying very much. It can be physical. It can be reaching out to stroke someone's arm. If they tell you about a story, you want to reassure them in some way. And it could be even as simple as sitting beside someone's bed. They might even
Mhm.
not even know you're there.
Mhm.
If they're sleeping or if they're not conscious, but just being there is a form of supportive help. And I think there's magic in stillness and in listening, versus always jumping in to give advice or information. And I think with supportive help, that's probably can be sometimes the largest emotional cost to the helper.
Mm. That's interesting. I- Where were you in the early years of my marriage? Because even now, decades later, I feel like I'm there's times where my wife really just needs me to give the supportive help of just listen, where I might want to be, well, let's do this, right? And I have to think that's just a proxy for how it works in the workplace too, right? Like that person just needs us to listen, not fix the problem necessarily yet. And yet I think it's
Yeah.
interesting. The last thing you added that sometimes that could take the biggest toll because it might be easier. Like if you see somebody on the street who needs money, it's easy to flip a bill maybe, or and you can walk away, and it doesn't necessarily take a toll. It doesn't have to, but to sit and listen to somebody, hear their story, that's a different thing. Am I seeing that right?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I
That's
think that one of the really important things in the book, which I'm sure you're going to get to, but I'll just jump in if you don't mind, in
mhm,
case I don't get around to saying it,
mhm,
is that very thing of asking, for the project managers listening, you know yourself. If someone asks you, oh, actually, pause. I can sense you're under stress, or I can see you're stressed about something, or this thing isn't going quite right. Pause. What is it you need right now? What kind of help can I offer you?
yeah,
And asking that question can sometimes just go, breath of fresh air. Oh, someone's actually taking a moment to ask me. And so my job very much is, even as a coach, sometimes I'll say, look, I can offer you a number of different routes here. I can talk about the psychology of the thing. We can go into the past. We can talk about the childhood messages that you might have received. We can try and unpack that. But right now, with this imminent pressure you feel you're under, perhaps I'd like to give you some anxiety management techniques instead, and then we can talk about the other things moving forward. So I'm constantly checking in with my coaching clients, what kind of help I can offer them too, even though it might sound like it's all of the same thing, kind of under the umbrella of psychology and coaching.
yeah. It makes total sense. Just let's throw a scenario by you. Let's say a project manager. I'm gonna name this project manager Paul for project manager in a meeting with their team, and let's raise the stakes by saying there's some key stakeholders there, maybe even the sponsor who's funding the project. So there's like a power differential there. The project manager notices that a team member, Sarah, is struggling in her response to a question about a risk. So Paul jumps in to help. And what Sarah's saying here is, and they restate it in a way that Paul's not wrong, that, it's accurate. But if someone was really watching closely, they may have noticed Sarah just slumped a little, in her body language after that interaction. I think Paul intended to help, but maybe just made it worse. And, she doesn't say anything to Paul, but if we caught up with her later, I wonder if she would say, yeah, there he goes again. I was just about to basically the same thing. And so that scenario, I've seen this scenario. Right? So in fact, I've been in this scenario and I've been Paul and I've been Sarah. So you talk about three dynamics that play out in helping situations. So did this scenario flush out any of those?
Yeah. I mean, the first, I suppose, the most obvious is status, isn't it? The one of the three dynamics to talk about is status, and how when you're the helper, you can have a higher status,
Mhm,
higher level of social status, like, oh, I'm the one helping you.
mhm,
You're the helpee. This is one of the reasons why we don't ask for help, because we don't want that sense of one downness.
right,
I don't want to feel like I owe you something. I don't want to feel like you're a better person because I'm the one needing help. The ego gets in the way at this point, doesn't it? And clearly with Paul and Sarah, Paul, albeit with good intentions,
mhm,
is playing the status game. Well, I can articulate better than she can her own thoughts. What is also happening, I feel, is a sense of assumptiveness, assumptive help. Like we
mhm,
talk about assumptive versus responsive help. Are you assuming someone's doing it? Or have you asked? And, is it in a response to being asked? So assuming Sarah needs help. Oh, Paul's like, oh, I'm going to jump in. She looks like she's struggling. I'll rescue her. But it's not, is it? It's making her feel small and look small, and it's belittling her. So I think it's easy for us to assume that people want help, which is why we say for the help check, is it wanted and needed? And to check with that person, to ask them a question, to say, actually, Sarah, shall I jump in here? Shall I? I think I know what you're talking about. Can I rephrase that? And Sarah might
mhm,
go, no, it's okay. Thanks, Paul. I've got this. Or she might say, actually, yeah, I just can't find the words at the moment.
right, right. Yeah. It's a whole different way of doing it, isn't it? Yeah. I'm thinking of somebody, it's not exactly this scenario, Jess, but he'd been on my team for a while. He went to a different company, and I reached out about 6 months later. Hey, how are things at the new place? And he goes, "Oh, these people don't know how to do stuff." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, they put together these documents and they don't do it right. So I just redo it myself." And it's not exactly Paul's thing here with Sarah, but I thought of also the autonomy versus dependency, that we can sometimes think our way is better and almost create this dependency that, oh, the boss is going to swoop in and do it anyway, so why should I care? As opposed to, I thought it was brilliant in the book how you say, is my helping developing, and see if I got this right, but am I developing autonomy? Am I developing more dependency on me, or am I actually, as you say, am I teaching them how to fish, or am I giving them a fish? Right. That's kind of the idea of the
Yeah.
autonomy versus dependency, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's totally right. I think with any helping relationship, with any relationship, are you creating autonomy, in that, I'm okay, so I'll use my coaching as an example if you don't mind, because it's sometimes, and mostly I'll say to a coaching client, so the way I like to do is kind of psycho education, if you like. I
Mhm,
want to give you the tools. I want to explain why this works
mhm,
so that it works for you. So that when we're not working together in over 6 months' time or in 18 months' time, you can still use these tools for yourself. I want to create autonomy. However, at some points during each coaching contract, and from the very beginning, I'll say to each client, by the way, you get a free, what I call an emergency call. You can contact me via WhatsApp or email or whatever and say, Jess, I need I need to speak with you. Now, this can be for any reason. Sometimes it's commiseration, sometimes it's celebration, sometimes it's just, oh, that meeting is going ahead as planned, but they've moved it forward. Help me figure out what to say. And that emergency call might seem to be creating a dependency. If they think, oh, I can just phone Jess.
right,
If I said, phone me anytime in the next 6 months and email, and I will jump on the call with you, and I will have, that will be creating dependency,
mhm,
but I give them very limited access to that level of kind of emergency help. So I think sometimes there is a need for both, with
mhm.
you and your family, you and your friends. There's sometimes, and let's put this back into
Yeah.
the working situation where if you're the project manager, people are going to be coming to you all the time. If you're always immediately saying, yes, I can do that for you, yes, give me 3 hours and I'll get it done by tonight, or yes, 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 they're going to come back again and again and again because they don't see you protecting your time or your energy, so therefore they're not going to.
Yeah.
And if you're saying yes immediately, then you're almost creating that dependency. So if you're the one sitting there listening to this thinking, oh my goodness, no wonder those people come to me all the time, it's because I'm feeding it. I'm accidentally maintaining their dependency on me. And although I quite like that, I like being the person who is indispensable and I
Right.
like being the one they come to for help. However, it's not serving me or them or my relationship, and it's certainly not protecting my energy or my time.
I love how you said that because it reminds me of how you talk about the drivers that what drives you. Because sometimes it just feels good, right? Like I
Yeah.
want to be needed, right? I mean, and so I thought I'd ask you of a time when you helped someone recently, because you're more aware of this. What were some of the motivators or inner drivers that maybe helped you, or what drove your help in that situation?
Yeah. Well, somebody who I have only met virtually in a kind of networking group
Yeah.
messaged me. Now we've been in that networking group for over a year
Hmm.
together, and she messaged me out of the blue saying, "Can we chat?"
Hmm.
And I'll give you two examples, okay? Because I'm kind of
Yeah.
slipping
Yeah.
into another one. So I'll give you two examples of how I felt, and it's real. Okay, so one of them had never contacted me before and said, "Oh, Jess, I know you're a psychologist, and obviously we meet regularly. I really need help with this thing. Can you jump on a call?" And I was just like, "Oh." We've been in this group for a whole year and you've never contacted me for a one-to-one, or as I would call
Mhm.
it, a one-to-one, or a personal chat. And now you're assuming because of my role and because of my profession and because of the book I've written, that I would be available. So
Mm,
that's a constant battle I have in my
interesting.
head.
Right.
And then I say, yes. So I draw boundaries around it first, and I say to myself, as I do in the book, to the reader, as long as you consciously choose who you help, how you help, and when you help, then that's your helping boundary. Whatever it is to you, whatever it is to that person, it might change from person to person across different situations, but that is your helping boundary. So I
Mm,
chose to help, even though I felt a little bit of resentment and I thought, oh, that's a bit awkward or a bit strange, because there was somebody else in that same group who had connected with me on a one-to-one very early on, and we became friends. And then when she needed my help, and she's also a big fan of the book, which is lovely. She's like, there's a particular part, and I think I'm experiencing that now. Can you help me? And I was absolutely fell over myself. And I was so glad that she had asked me. Like, of
yeah,
course, I would love to help. I would love to discuss this with you. What can I do? And I'm even getting goosebumps thinking about it. You see
sweet.
how the energy shifts, probably even in my voice.
Right. Right.
And so I don't, I like to see myself as a compassionate person who gives freely, but I have to understand that I'm not,
Right. Right.
I'm
Yeah.
human. So
But it
and it's
wasn't,
taken
but it
them.
wasn't just to relieve discomfort, because that's one of the reasons you had there. Like sometimes people do it like it's awkward to say no. We're in the same networking group. So I'll do it to relieve my own discomfort about having that conversation. And that doesn't give you energy, right? It's the opposite.
Yeah, that doesn't work for me. I
Mm,
think I experience a lot of discomfort a lot of the time when I know someone is suffering, or if I hear after the fact, I think, oh my goodness, I should have known, or I should have been able to do something, or I should have had some psychic ability, to be able to help.
right.
But I think, yeah, of course, some people are like when you give money to somebody who's, maybe somebody in the street who's offering a magazine, in return for money, but maybe they're a homeless person, or maybe they're begging, and you're probably to some degree relieving some discomfort by
Mm,
offering them money, or stopping to pay for one of their magazines. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think just
mm,
acknowledging where it's coming from
mm,
is fascinating.
yeah,
And I don't think I'm never going to say to somebody, stop helping. I'm only ever going to say, why? Why do you help?
right.
Why do you enjoy helping in some ways, but maybe not in others? Why do you enjoy helping certain people, but maybe not others? And what is it about your own sense of identity that you see as a helper? And is that getting in your way? Because as you said in the intro, and I'm aware that we haven't touched on this yet, and it's such a
Mm,
beautiful part of the kind of the whole theme, is how it links to our own self-worth and our own identity as the helper.
yeah. So can I give you a scenario, personal scenario? If I ask you, I should ask it of myself. I'm in the Chicago area. So after a workshop, I was not in a hurry to get to the train station, but I thought I've got enough time I can walk. And there was somebody who looked a little confused. And in the Midwest of the U.S., where we tend to be like, "Hey, do you need some help?" We see that where it's, I would say, it feels like that's cultural. And he turns out he was looking for money, but there was something that was different about it. And so I'm like, well, tell me more. And he's like, well, I need fare for, to get home. And it sounded like a typical sort of pitch that you get where they don't really want the money, or they don't want the money for what they're saying. But anyway, we just started asking questions. I'm like, I'm walking to the train station. You want to walk along? And we had this lovely conversation. I mean, this amazing conversation, Jess. Now, I did give him probably more money than I never normally would, like notably. Did I do it because I wanted to feel good about myself? Did I do it because I don't think it's because I wanted to be seen in a good light because no one was watching. I'll never meet him again, so I don't think it's to be needed. Discomfort, maybe, yeah, a little bit. I wasn't looking for control, I don't think, but it did feel in that moment it was acting on my values of curiosity that every person's made in the image of God. Like everyone has inherent value. It felt to me like a value sort of thing. But then I read your book. I'm like, is there such thing as altruism or not? Is it always some form of reciprocity? So I don't know, doctor. What do
Well,
you think?
well, I mean, if you look at some of the research that we quoted in the book, altruism does exist, so perhaps it was altruistic. Only you can decide for yourself, Andy, what layers were going on, what layers were playing.
Right.
Or you say nobody was watching, but he was a witness to your kindness.
Good point.
Does it matter where it came from? I don't think so.
Right.
But
Right.
what's interesting is the inquiry, the fact that
Mhm.
you read the book and went, oh, I
Mhm.
wonder why. I mean, and if it's values driven, well, where are your values from? Your values are
Mhm.
from your upbringing, your societal norms. You said Chicago and the Midwest seems to be, a cultural thing to stop and ask people how they're doing and to check in with people who seem to be suffering. So lots of things are at play here, aren't they? Unconsciously, whether we're aware of it or not. And I think
Mhm.
what a lovely, beautiful story anyway. And to spend time with that person to kind of really connect authentically for a brief few minutes, while
It was
walking to the
incredible.
station.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think your point before, which I didn't necessarily pick up as clearly in the book as I have in the conversation, that did it add energy in a good way, in a positive way, in a like, and maybe mutually, as opposed to did it just drain me or something like that. So,
Yeah, because that's the other point. One of the fascinating things I loved about doing the research for the book is that we found so many positive things can happen as a result of helping others,
mhm.
and physiological and biological. So, not only do we get this, Alan Lux described it as the helper's high, which is such a
Yeah,
beautiful phrase.
yeah, I like that.
The helper's high, yeah, and you get that, don't you? You had it on your face when you even recalled that story just now. I
And
could
likewise with
see.
your networking person as well. You did.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, and I got little goosebumps. That's like the
mm,
euphoric high, the
right.
helper's high, which actually motivates us to want to help more and want to help people in other ways. But we're also finding energizing. It helps to increase our own sense of self-worth and our own confidence. It gives us hope and courage. And there's a lot of neuropsychology and neuroscience to suggest that different areas of the brain are activated when we're helping others. That builds hope and courage, and that activates our systems to help us want to do it more. So it's rewarding for us too. We're releasing endorphins when we've helped someone. We feel good about ourselves. So there's lots of different systems going along, as well as psychologically. I see myself as a helper. I just helped someone. I feel good about myself. We talk about the irrational beliefs in the book.
Right.
I
Yeah.
must help everyone. I should help others to prove I'm a good person. I shouldn't have any of my own needs. If those kinds of thoughts are explored in a lot of detail as well.
Yeah.
But it's really fascinating to unpack the
It
psychology
is.
of why we help and the benefits of
Yeah.
that as
Yeah,
well.
I feel like this theme throughout the book is be curious. It's just be curious about that. And
Yeah.
you might be very satisfied where that curiosity leads you, or it might be like, huh, that high I'm is trying to fill a need that I didn't realize I had. It just was under the covers,
Mm.
and it kind of reminds me of what you say in the book about super helper is less about what we do, but why we do it and how hard it is to stop it. I think that's kind of what I took away from the book. So, what are some clues that someone listening to us might use to recognize? Are we starting to kind of lean or tip towards compulsive helping?
Mm. Um, if you are struggling to say no to requests for help, if and you can't push back for whatever reason, even though you would like to, because your diary is already full, or you don't really want to be the person this person comes to all the time, because you've accidentally created some dependency, but you struggle to say no, that's a sign you might be slipping into super helper syndrome. If you are feeling exploited by some people who are always coming to you or coming to you first, or their demands are ever increasing, and you're like, oh, they never seem to ask anyone else. They only ever seem to come to me,
Mm,
and I'm sure they could do it themselves, but why do they just, come to me? So there's a sense of resentment building up as well. So in relationships, and we talk about the friendometer in the book, which is this really interesting exercise that we created, that where you begin to identify in your relationships, actually, are these people all of my friends, or are they just helpees? Are some of them just people I help? And are they only in a relationship with me because I help them? And there have been some hard truths, Andy, that I have had to face in going through all of that work myself, especially in time for writing the book. So Other signs, you're just tired, but you just keep going on. You're like, oh, I can just squeeze that in. Like one person, in fact, a number of people said in interviews, oh, I don't mind. I love it. I would say yes, yes, and yes. I'll
Right.
always find time for people. But my husband, he keeps saying, why are you helping them? But why have you just said yes? You're knackered. You don't have any time. You don't have any free time, blah, blah, blah. So it's other people you might not notice yourself, but other
Right.
people might notice on your behalf of like, why are you caught in these situations? So there are many, many signs, but those are the kind of some of the most obvious I can think of.
Mhm. I don't know if this works, but I find when I find myself saying I have to, as opposed to I choose to. So if I feel like, well, I have to work late tonight, or I have to do this over the weekend, I was taught replace have to with choose to, and then how does that sit? And
That's a
I
good one.
I wonder if the compulsive is I just feel like I have to, and little do I know it's some unmet need that might be driving that have to, but it truly is not a have to. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think what is the belief underlying that
Right.
thought?
Mhm.
Yeah, like I have to, well, why? Or because I see myself as someone who helps, or because I see someone who does stuff really quickly and efficiently, or because I made a promise to myself, not that anyone else should care, that I
Mhm.
would do that by a certain time. So we live by often unconscious beliefs that aren't helpful. And that is truly, I think, to answer your previous question properly, which I don't think I did. That's where the compulsion is. I think that's the difference between being compassionate freely and having a compulsion is when you've identified the thought, I should, I must, I ought, I have to,
Mhm.
but da, 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 excuse after
Mhm.
excuse,
Yeah.
underlying that a belief about yourself that actually doesn't have to be true. It's a tyrannical command that has no real common sense underlying it, but it's a belief that I must help others to prove I'm a good person. I must help everyone. I
Don't want to
shouldn't
let
have
people
any
down.
needs. Yeah, I don't want to let people down. I shouldn't have any needs. Other people are more important than I am. And I think that's where it becomes upsetting for people who see themselves as the helper when they notice that they shouldn't be helping in this way. They are tired and exhausted. A nurse I spoke to, and it was during COVID, I was doing this some of this interviewing, and she said, I can't take time off. I know I physically need it, but the guilt
Right. Yeah.
just stops me from taking time off. And we're all the same. So
Mhm.
none of us will take time off, even though it's scheduled, even though we're supposed to. We just feel too guilty because we know the others are going to have to suffer to fill our own boots. So sometimes the compulsion is conscious. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. That's good. What I like about the book is it doesn't just point out the problem, but also some I really helpful roadmaps for how do you deal with it. So people need to read the book to get all the benefit, but just one or two of your favorite ways to help clients move from being a super helper when it's more of this compulsion, if they have some of these patterns towards more healthy helping. What are some examples and maybe walk us through one you've seen work really well?
So I think boundaries is this big, beautiful B word that I love to
Mhm.
use. Healthy boundaries. Choosing, and I said this earlier, but I think it's worth noting, choosing who you help, how you help, and when you help. Because if there's a
Mhm.
conscious choice, it's not going to have the same emotional exhaustion attached to it as if you're just doing it on autopilot. Even if you choose exactly the same behavior and you don't change how you behave at all, by consciously choosing, as I did with that example I gave you earlier, I
Yeah.
consciously chose to help them. I could almost free my soul. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I've chosen this. Fine, let's deal with it. Let's embrace it. Let's come with an open mind and an open heart. But if I still feel like if I felt like, oh, this problem is putting me under pressure, I don't feel like I need to, I don't feel like I feel it's unfair that they're asking me, then I'm still in that headspace and I can't give freely anyway. What kind of help can I give her? Probably not very much. So I think that's the step to having healthy boundaries, choosing who you help, how you help, and when you help. And it sounds so simple, but my goodness me, I'm sure we can think of examples of when I've had to put those in place. And there's one example I can think of my mom who used to phone me like 5 times a day, every
Mhm.
day. and she didn't need to, but she wanted to. And
Mm.
so I tried lots of different ways to contract with her, which is why I'm an expert in boundaries and boundary setting,
Right. Uh,
because I spent a lot of my first 40 years or so like trying to do this. So, but I got around to saying and trying this one out, and it worked for a short while. Hey, mum, I can't listen to you right now because I'm at work, but on Sunday I can listen to you for a whole half hour. I
mm,
can just sit
mhm.
there and we
Yeah.
can have a cup of tea and we can chat. And
Right.
no, often that wasn't good enough, but at least I was trying to set some boundaries. I was trying to say, who am I helping? My mum. When am I helping her? Sunday afternoon, I can give her my time without too much resentment. And how am I helping her? By listening. I'm not going to
Mhm.
try and change her. I'm not going to try and
Right.
manage her. I'm not going to, try and do too much, but I will just listen and I will offer supportive help. So I think those boundaries questions,
Mm.
sorry, rather a question about your boundaries can be really useful in asking yourself, who, when, and how. And I think,
Mm.
we spoke about so many things in the book, Andy. Are there any other was there anything you particularly found useful when it got to this part and identifying for yourself, when to draw a boundary? If I could
You
put you
know,
on the spot.
no, I appreciate it. I just I truly like the help, and so for example, I coach my middle school son's basketball team, but if he was not going to play, I would easily stop it, even though a number of parents say, "Oh, my kid's only playing because of you." I I don't care. I will stop if my kid does it. So that would be. I feel like it helped me identify where do I have some boundaries, but then where is it that I say yes? And there are times where I might say yes to a client when I realize it's this isn't the best thing. Like I wouldn't be the best person for this. This would be the best. So I feel like where your book helped me most was more of the introspection of what is driving the yeses in a way that I'm happy with, and what's driving it where it's like, am I feeling guilted into that? Am I doing that just purely out of habit? And I feel like it just reinforced this, Jess, and I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I'm increasingly convinced the world will not draw a line. We have to draw a line. And I don't
Yeah.
think I'm a natural boundary drawer by nature or nurture, but
Mm,
learning to draw those where are the boundaries? Like uh as many years as my wife and I are into a marriage, we're only recently now as the kids have gotten older saying we are having dates. we're we're not going to let the week crowd out having more dates, and it's like how did we go so long sometimes without that? So learning to not wait for other people to draw the line, I guess, is something
mm.
I feel like is part of my journey on this.
Yeah, lovely. I've just got a puppy. She's now 15 months, and my partner and I are like, oh, let's try and have a life with a puppy rather than we have a puppy, which it has been for the last 15 months. I've just seen pure exhaustion, although a
Right.
lot of joy as well. So
Sure.
I can understand that need for setting boundaries and resetting. And I think to put this back into the workplace, where are you giving to the listener? Where are you giving more than you want to be?
Mm,
Where are you saying yes more frequently than you need to be? How can you support others to be less dependent on you? How can you help them have more autonomy? And how can you also then um, stop assuming that your help is wanted? Because I think those are the most obvious traps that we've talked about that we can all fall into. And then I think underlying that, one of the things that we pull out in the book related to boundaries and why it's difficult to set boundaries is because you don't really know what you need.
yeah.
You don't really know what you want. I mean, that great. You've identified with your wife, we need more date nights now. Great. You've identified what you need. But when you become the helper, when you see yourself as a helper and it's your identity, and when your identity is wrapped up in that, it comes when other people become so important and their needs become your priority. It's different like with your kids even, but
Mm,
we're putting this into the workplace setting
right.
too. Your stakeholders, your colleagues, the people you're serving at work, when their needs matter more, it's very difficult sometimes to pull back and say, but what do I need in this situation?
Mhm.
how do I give myself that thing? Or how do I ask someone? Or how do I find someone who can meet that need for me?
I'm thinking of it's it is completely acceptable in the workplace to go, oh, I'm just a people pleaser. It's admitting a weakness, but it's reinforcing an identity. And I wonder sometimes, oh, I like to be a helper, right? It's people admire that and it reinforces an identity, but it might be the thing that's taking us under, right? And so it's recognizing that maybe even be careful of how we even say things like that. Oh, I'm just a people pleaser. I'm just a helper, and those are all fine and good. But your book is brilliant at just getting us to think what's under that and where is it working and where is it not working. I feel like that would be an easy benefit of reading this book.
Oh, thanks, Andy. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you enjoyed it and got so much out of it. It is packed.
It is.
We
It
we
is
didn't
packed for
realize
sure.
we didn't quite realize how long a book we were going to be writing. We certainly weren't commissioned to write this length, so we had to squeeze it in. But I made sure one of the last things I had to argue for, because that was my boundary, was we have to put the excerpts in. We have to
Mhm.
put the
Yeah.
interview
Yes.
excerpts in because it's really about how super helper syndrome reveals itself in across so many different industries, across cultures, across the globe. And ultimately, most people are in a helping role, whether they realize it or not.
Right.
And
Sure.
ultimately, most of us don't have healthy boundaries
Mhm.
always.
Well,
Yeah.
let's
So
end with
thanks
this
so
because there's so many
much.
things we could talk about. But we have a lot of parents who listen to the podcast, and you can't read this book without realizing a lot of these patterns start early in life. And so, what are some things that parents could do to nurture healthy helping habits in our kids? What do you think?
Ooh, how long have you got now? Okay.
Yeah,
So,
it's another book.
um,
Actually, it wasn't. It was this book in some ways, but
yeah, and in some ways, of course, we talk about the childhood messages for each of those irrational beliefs and how they can come about. And I think when when you've got children, the first thing to identify is, are you treating your children differently, whether because they are the firstborn or the lastborn, or because they're male or female? Are you accidentally encouraging and reinforcing certain cultural standards equally? Like we say in the book, and certainly as I was brought up to be a helper and a supporter and a doer and a giver and a server. Whereas there are, I come across people who say, well, my brother was never asked the same thing. He was allowed to go up and, I was the one asked to do the dishes to clean the dishes after dinner. My brother was allowed to run around in the garden and be adventurous and climb the trees. So those are very simple questions we could ask ourselves, and to notice what kind of behaviors we are reinforcing based on our own upbringing and our own childhood. What are you passing on through the
mhm,
generations? And I honestly think that we could be teaching the younger generation to be, one, thoughtful and considerate of others, regardless of sex. But
mhm,
I think also, when we're teaching that, to also teach boundaries and to say, well, do some of it. Hey, come and help me do some of this. Or role model, well, I'm going to be doing some of this, but I'm not going to do all of it.
yeah,
So role modeling boundaries at the same time as role modeling compassion, I
mhm,
think, is really key. What I'm sometimes hearing is that people expect their daughters still to do a lot more of the caring and the support work than their sons. But I'm also hearing that they're trying to help their
mhm,
sons, be more thoughtful and considerate. Everyone's different, and there's no right or wrong. But I do think, if I'm speaking to any one of my friends who are parents, I'm encouraging them to role model those boundaries in a really healthy way,
yeah.
regardless. Mm.
I'm thinking of some of our discussion about autonomy and dependency also comes to mind because if it's a 2-year-old, that's one thing, but if it's a 12-year-old or an 18-year-old, right? Like, I've just observed this just recently. I would like to say we offered our children the opportunity to be on the swim team this summer, but we actually made them because we're like, just 1 year, just 1 year, just give us 1 year. But I watched just some of the other parents like, remember to put your goggles on. Now, this is a child old enough to remember their goggles, but it's almost like this, it's not, it's dependency. It
Mm,
feels like, and I see that to myself sometimes, Jess, of like, I just want to do it for them, with the
mm.
best intentions. But are we developing autonomy? I feel like the assumptive versus responsive can be a parent thing too. Like,
Mm.
wait, tell me more instead of, or do you want, are you ready to hear this? Or do they want to hear this? It's a
Yeah.
lot of this could apply.
And I think with parenting, there comes a point where you don't need to tie their shoelaces anymore. You don't need to, drive them everywhere anymore. But there comes a point, a shift, and over a period of time where you become more of a guide or a coach
Right.
than the doer or
Mhm.
the dependent one. But I also see a lot of parents struggle with letting go of being needed. They
Sure.
like to be indispensable,
Sure.
like,
Yeah.
but you need me, and the
Yeah.
empty nesters I end up coaching.
Right.
So my role has changed. I'm coming. They come to me because they now they're empty nesters. So in the UK we call that when the children have left home and they're now regrouping. The adults, the parents are regrouping and saying, right, where are we? Where are we at? Similar to you, and perhaps and
Mhm.
saying, what do we want now? We've got some of our time back. We've got some of our disposable income back as well. What do we
Right.
want in our lives? But also, what's my role now? I'm no
Mhm.
longer the mother I need to be. My children are off at uni or they've left home and they're kind of finding themselves again and getting that back to that place of what do I need and where do I get those needs met?
Mhm.
Yeah. So I mean, gosh, we could talk about this
For
for
sure.
days. I mean,
Right.
what yeah, did you have any other insights or other things to throw in on that
Well,
childhood messages and
well,
parenting?
I appreciate you asking. When our oldest got married, our three oldest are married now, and my wife was reading a book on being a good mother-in-law, and the message of the book I think was just when they come and if they have problems, the best response is, "Mm, oh, we don't have enough money to make it to the end of the month." Mm. And I thought that was brilliant advice. And I think after reading your book, that is maybe supportive helping, but it's not resources helping. No, it changes. And so once again, I feel like what your book helps, regardless of whether you want to look through a lens outside of work, at work, from a leadership lens, from a friend, a coworker, like being aware of all these dynamics. I'm telling you, for people listening, we've just barely touched on what's available in Jess's book. I mean, if you would like, I think a truly thought provoking, incredibly researched guide to healthy helping, and not even just for you, if you want to get, we've talked about parenting and stuff, but even helping your team understand this, get a copy of Jess's book, The Super Helper Syndrome. I put links to the book and the book's website in the show notes for this cast. So, Jess, thank you so much for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thank you so much, Andy. It's been really great.
Special thanks to Jess for joining us here on episode 477 of the People and Projects podcast. Thanks for joining us for this. There's a long discussion, but I think this is a topic that is worth us reflecting on, as we talked about near the end of the episode, where it's so easy to be like, I'm a people pleaser, I'm a helper. And that probably has led to so much of your success. But I'm saying this because I'm talking to myself, but I think I'm talking to you as well. There's times where that spills over to maybe working against you. So I don't get the sense that people are, you know, all super helpers always or not. It's not quite that simple, but there are probably some situations where your helping is good, but then it goes over a line and then it's compensating for something either within us or within them. It's actually covering other underlying problems. And that's what I think this book is so good at, helping us find it out. So don't take from this that helping is bad, be a helper, but just when is it that, as we talked about in the interview, it starts to kind of burn us out. We're starting to resent it. I have to do this instead of I'm choosing to do it. I think we could all get better at setting boundaries. And I think if nothing else from this interview, take that of where is it that you're not currently setting boundaries that you should. If you pick up a copy of this book, I'd love to hear what you take away from it. You can reach me at show@peopleandprojectspodcast.com. And whether it's from the book or even just today's discussion, I'd love to hear what resonated with you. If you like more on this topic, I put links in the show notes to 3 episodes. The first one is episode 448 with Marie Helen Pelletier. And it's a really good book on burnout and resilience. And a key message of the book is that we're not as resilient as we think. And so I don't think any of us wake up in the mindset like, I'm going to help to my own demise, right? I'm going to burn myself out today. But we can easily start heading that way. And there's so many episodes actually that we've talked about this, but episode 448 is one that I don't think I recommend enough. So check that one out. Also, episode 385 with Vanessa Patrick. She wrote a book on the power of saying no. And when it comes to setting good boundaries, how to respond in practice when you feel like the boss and everyone else in the meeting is looking at you and like, you can get this done by Friday, right? And you're like, you want to say no, but you feel like you have to say yes. So many good ideas in episode 385 with Vanessa Patrick. And then finally, I want to mention episode 26, way back in episode 26. It was with Dr. Ed Shine. I had the opportunity to interview him twice before he died. He's an MIT fellow. He's the guy who coined the term corporate culture. Both times I interviewed him, he was in his 90s. The guy is just incredible. But he wrote a book called Helping: How to Offer, Give, and Receive Help. And he shares some really interesting ideas in episode 26. And if nothing else, listen to it because he's such a legend. The links to all those are in the show notes. You know, at the start of the program, I mentioned our resource called The 5 Best Resources to Pass Your PMP on Your First Try. I'm telling you, I just recommend it for you or anybody else. There's so many people I know who are pursuing that. Now, it could be you're listening because you're trying to get free PDUs, which is great. I'm glad you're doing that. But you maybe have some colleagues who are thinking about getting their PMP, so you can certainly let them know about it. The links to the resource are in the show notes for this podcast. And I just want to thank you. You know, there's so many options when it comes to project management and leadership related podcasts, just so many ways to help develop your skills. Thank you so much for joining us for this podcast. If you've got a friend or a colleague that maybe doesn't know about us, just let them know what you get value out of this. If you get value, let them know. I think that'd be great. On behalf of me and my team, thank you so much for listening.